Welcome to the Backyard Professor videos. I have I've had him on some shows before, and I have him back for more torture and punishment, chaos and mayhem. Colby Townsend, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
We are ready to stomp through an interesting book. We want to have a conversation about this gentleman here, William L. Davis. Both Colby and I really love books, so we're happy to talk about books. Visions in a Seer Stone, Joseph Smith, and the Making of the Book of Mormon. And the reason I asked Colby if he would oblige me to discuss this book with me, and he of course loves the book, so, and I will let him express to you why. But my experience with this is I actually had this in my hands at our local bookstore, right? So I'm looking and browsing, and I looked at it and looked through it and put it back, and then I was on the phone with you, Colby, that night, and I can't remember how the subject came up, but this book, Visions in a Seer Stone, Colby mentioned it, and I go, wait a minute. I had that book in my hands earlier today, and Colby's reaction just shocked me. He said, "Oh, that's one of the most that is one of the best books on the subject, Carrie." And I'm going, "No, don't tell me that," because I wasn't sure if it was still on the shelf. So I immediately got off the phone with Colby and ran over there to the bookstore and got it. Yes, I am the proud owner of the book. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. On the back of it, and you know, when you browse through books, you want to read some of the jacket blurbs and all that. And this gentleman named Paul Gutjahr said, a must needed contribution to scholarship about the Book of Mormon's creation. Davis argues that the oral mode of the period sermon culture and storytelling played a vital role in how Joseph Smith composed his new sacred text. Readers interested in Mormon studies and in 19th century American religious culture will need to take notice of this book. Now, this just happens to be Colby's area of expertise as well. And it says, Paul Gutjahr, author of the Book of Mormon, a biography. So he's written a book too. Now, I have never heard of Paul Gutjahr. And so I'm looking at the shelves, and fortunately, my bookstore alphabetizes the books by author, and ta-da! Paul Gutjahr, the Book of Mormon, a biography. So while I got this one, I also bought one of the reviewers. And now, Colby, it's your turn to tell the audience who Paul Gutjahr is. This is so interesting. It's a small world.
Yeah. Paul is one of my main professors here at IU Bloomington, as I work on, the dual PhD in English and religious studies. So, he's a fantastic scholar. You have the second edition, I guess. I don't know if it's a second edition really, but I would prefer to have that version of it. Mine is the hardcover. It's kind of like a blue thing with an angel Moroni on the front. I like that cover. It's kind of a fun color, and just that version of it is really nice. Paul is basically a scholar of the Bible in American history and literature, and he wrote a pretty famous work that was published by Stanford University Press in the late 1990s that looks at the history of the printing of the Bible in the United States and its influence. So he's a fantastic scholar. I really love working with him. I'm going to be doing a directed reading with him as part of preliminary to my exams with him. So I'm going to be doing that this coming spring. So it'll start in January.
Awesome. Well, tell him hi from the new fan.
Yeah, I will.
Nice thing I like about this book, you guys, just for my audience sake. One, he's obviously looked into it, quite frankly, thorough, because it is 255 pages. So we're not talking big, but we're not talking small. The print in it is somewhat a little larger than normal and the margins are somewhat skinnier, it makes for delightful reading. I love the layout of this book. I can't wait to get into it for the information, of course.
Yeah.
Now, is William Davis? I mean, William obviously knows Paul too, Dr. Gutjahr.
Yeah, I don't know how well they know each other, but they know of each other. At the
Okay,
very
well,
least.
you got him to write a blurb on his book, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think the press usually does that. They reach out to different scholars and get them to write.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and you can't miss the cover. Davis's cover is just flippin' rockin' cool,
yeah,
and you told me that he actually designed it.
yep, yeah,
Wow, that's fortunate. I never got that with my scroll saw book. When I was a scroll saw artist, I wanted to do a certain cover, and they
yeah,
did whatever they wanted, but not a big
yeah,
deal.
right.
So you have now. I have not completely been able to read through this book just yet because I simply bought it just a couple days ago,
Mhm.
and and you are the one that encouraged me to do that with a very strong recommendation that it was truly one of the best books on this subject. Go ahead and elaborate for us
Yeah,
your take on this book, why you think it's so significant.
yeah. I think it's significant for several reasons. Uh, Not just because I think it's one of the best books on the Book of Mormon, which I do think that, but also what it adds to our understanding of oratory and performance in early America.
Now, when you
So
say performance, what do you mean performance? What's that mean?
yeah, it means a lot of different things, but it can mean theater, it can mean public
Oh,
speaking, it can mean a handful of others. Oratory probably gets at a lot of that, but
like a
Bill,
preacher, you know.
yeah, preaching, yeah,
Repent
all
ye, or face the wrath of the Almighty.
exactly,
I,
yeah.
I, I would be half decent, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's being a good male citizen in early America meant that you were a good public speaker. Like that was a really big part of the idea of one's identity in early America. So public speaking was taught at young age. The elementary education, which he gets into quite a bit in different parts of the book,
Starts fairly early then. Yeah.
yeah, the education in early America was basically like rote memorization. You'd go through, and hopefully by the time you actually went to a common school or a Sunday school, whichever one you went to as a young kid for what's now grade school, you would probably know your alphabet, your ABCs, and your 1, 2, 3s. And at that point, you would go into your classroom and the other students had been memorizing different texts and you're all reciting them, and that's a really big part of what they were doing, as far as like reading and comprehension and doing that kind of thing. So what he points out in here is a specific aspect to early American education, in that you learn how to be able to give oral presentation to a public audience, whether it's small or big or whatever. And
Mhm.
that the main way that people were taught how to do that in early America was by laying down heads, so that initial. And this is really popular in sermon culture. This is really popular in political culture and public speaking. All of it. Everyone's using
All
this.
the way across the board.
Yeah,
So explain what he means by laying down heads.
yeah,
Because quite frankly, I can lay down head.
yeah. Right.
But
Well, like I think in today's language, it would be the TLDR, the too long didn't read version, right?
yeah,
You get that little bullet point list, right? But a lot of the time, though, this is extemporaneous speaking. So, particularly for evangelical, Protestant preachers, especially itinerant ministers that are going around and preaching in different places. For them, it was theologically necessary that you're speaking on the spot, that the Spirit is sort of speaking through you. It's extemporaneous. Um, one really important thing that he does point out in the book is that while that's true that they believed that and they did speak kind of on the spot, there was usually a sort of narrative structure, a skeleton for different kinds of sermons, and they would just say a whole lot of different kinds of things as they went. For ministers and preachers that were doing that kind of thing. So you would essentially learn how to have a very brief bullet point list of the main topics that you're going to hit in this specific sermon, or if it was memorized, whatever other kind of thing. But particularly though, and this is what's important for Davis's book, is composition. That sort of like composition through spoken word. And that's why this is really a performance text. Smith is performing to the scribe and whoever might be in the room. And the Book of Mormon manuscript is one of the earliest transcripts of a full performance like that.
A performance text.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So so it's a really important book for all of that, but it's also blending these two things together, showing that there is the laying down of heads in multiple different places in the Book of Mormon that act as sort of the key stakes in the composition of the book. So the little stakeholders. And he does that too in a really effective way, because again, he's working with, it's really a book directed at scholars who study early American religion and literature. That's really who this book is directed.
Yeah, it is. It's not a well, I mean, it's not a religious book. It's not a defender or a critic book at all.
At all. Yeah, he has things to show to other scholars who don't do anything with Mormonism. He has things to teach them about performance and orality and oral culture
in that time,
in that period. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's at the beginning of chapter 2. Yeah. The beginning of chapter 2, after a pretty brief intro talking about seer stones and Western esotericism, he jumps right into laying down of heads and written and oral composition, and right into a text that's not the Book of Mormon, but that was dictated by Joseph Smith in 1832. It was his first history. And he shows that he lays down heads as he's dictating, his history orally to a scribe. He lays down the heads, and then right after the heads are done, he starts jumping in on the first point, describes the first point, goes to the second point, right? So that laying
we can read this in his history. This is how he composed his own history.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 1832.
Yep. So he's showing that it's not just, even before he gets to the Book of Mormon, he's showing that Joseph Smith does know how to do this. This is what he was taught for oral composition, for that kind of performance. And so, he's showing right at the beginning, even before we get to the Book of Mormon, outside of the Book of Mormon, we can see that Joseph Smith was using this technique in his compositions.
So those numbers in brackets that Davis is doing, I'm on page 14 and 15, the first two pages on chapter 2. The numbers in brackets there, the 1, the 2, the 3, is that Davis showing us the heads, or is that in Joseph Smith's history? Do we know? I reading his, but anyway, he showed.
He said, I don't think it's exactly that, because it does say let's see, an account of his marvelous experience, and of those things. Firstly, firstly, he receiving the testimony from on high. Secondly, thirdly, fourthly.
There we go. Yeah.
So those would be the sort of bullet points. In front of those. Yeah.
He was pretty orderly from the get-go, more or less.
Yeah. I mean, he's using the techniques that he was taught, at the common school that he went to, and in oral composition. And
you think even though he had his it's standard that he only had a third grade education, so to speak. But
so
even in education, would he have been old enough to get this kind of?
He actually had more education than is usually assumed. That third grade thing is an assumed number, and it's not relevant. So there is no equivalent between, K through 12 today and what the education system was in early America. There's just no equivalent. There's no like, oh, that's this.
Right.
But Bill Davis did publish a few years ago, and then in my edited collection, Envisioning Scripture, there's a revised as in like added to version of his essay, where he actually reassesses Joseph Smith's formal education, and at minimum, he could have added more if he was, if he really wanted to. At minimum, Joseph Smith had 7 years of formal education.
Okay, now this is a book you edited? This is in the book you edited?
It is in there. It was originally published in Dialogue.
What was the name of the book?
The book is called Envisioning Scripture.
Envisioning Scripture.
Yep. And that one was published by Signature Books earlier this year. It has 10 essays, all on like
2022, so it's brand new.
Yeah. It just came out a few months ago.
Oh, nice.
And, Bill's is the only one that was originally written toward a Mormon studies audience. Although it was had broader implications too, but anyone studying early American religion could find that one interesting. And education, early American education too. But that book has 10 different essays on different aspects of early America and religion. Most of them were originally written.
Davis's elaboration even more than when. All right, cool.
Yeah. So Smith had more education than people usually assume, and at minimum, it was about 7 years. But yeah. So after that, he jumps in and actually shows a whole bunch of other examples. One that I've always found interesting that I love. I had noticed this before reading his book, so I was really excited to see this in here described this way.
And where you at?
On page 18.
Okay. All right.
So he talks about Daniel Defoe's The Life and Adventures of Robinson Crusoe.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So chapter 1, my birth and parentage. At 19 years of age, I determined to go to sea, dissuaded by my parents, elope with a schoolfellow and go on board ship. Storm rises, right? So you have all of that. Those are that's the heads for that specific chapter. And then I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York of a good family. When you read the beginning of Robinson Crusoe, it feels like First Nephi. It's incredible.
Doesn't it though?
Yeah.
Now when I got to this, he even says on the bottom of page 18, note how my birth and parentage in the summary corresponds with the opening line of the chapter. That is First Nephi. Now, when I came across this idea and this was a long time ago when I first became an apologist. I got it out of Hugh Nibley in his, I think it was either Sense Cumorah or in the prose to the book. I think it was Sense Cumorah. These are known as colophons anciently in ancient literature. And he mentioned that Thucydides and even Herodotus has colophons.
It was different than what Nibley described, but yes.
The idea. And so when I read this, when I read that as a genuine ancient point in Joseph Smith's favor, as an apologist, of course, I was quite excited. Reading this from this particular approach in the oratorial skills that were taught in Joseph Smith's day. And of course, it's obvious Joseph Smith had those skills. So, I mean, he did have some education. There's no question about that. This happened throughout all of his writings, or should I say dictations, right? I mean, it's in the Book of Abraham, even as he's translating the papyrus, the same theme shows up.
Yeah.
And so if it counted to such a degree in my mind, and it did, as okay, this is one more reason why to take the Book of Mormon as an authentic ancient text, then equally because it is every bit as exquisitely prominent and wonderful, it counts as a basis of Joseph Smith being able to do this as a good author, as a good, or it is not taking away from Joseph Smith. It's just simply shifting the time scale from 600 BC in Egyptian colophons right up to the
Right.
1830s in Joseph Smith's time.
Yeah, and this actually makes more sense. Because
No,
just even looking at Defoe, that's exactly like the beginning of First Nephi, right?
it
The
really
ancient
is.
colophon,
It's amazing.
yeah, the ancient colophon, at least like from what I've read in my research, the ancient colophon was usually just a little tiny note at the end of a text, not the beginning.
Now,
Um,
John Twetness in his study
yeah,
mentions that too.
does he?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
I
it's usually at the end, not the beginning, and it's not a part of the actual text. It's usually at the very end and saying, "Scribe so and so scribed this."
described this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So even then, like, I've seen that from Nibley. I haven't read everything from Nibley, but in passing here and there when I've been working on a specific project, I'll look at one of his books, and that's one of
Sure.
the things that just really confused me because I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing, but this is an area where that really doesn't work. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But yeah, if you ever get a chance, anyway, I mean, I think that Robinson Crusoe is one of the best things like ever written anyway. I love the book, and that's my from
The- I-
that's in the middle of my period and the development of the
It
novel.
is. It is. Yeah. Well, and I got to admit, I love the movie.
Yeah, right.
Several of the movies. I mean,
Sure.
those are so romantic and awesome and
Yeah,
just so adventurous. And
yeah,
wow, I wish I could do that.
right. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, reading just the first couple pages of Daniel Defoe, the Robinson Crusoe, is just, yeah, it's kind of like, yep, there's some interesting connections here.
Ah,
But
yeah,
the
it
funny
really is.
thing is in here, and I think this is great. Davis doesn't just connect it to First Nephi. He eventually does at the end of this paragraph, but he first connects it to Smith's own history.
He does.
He says
Yeah.
he shows how
This is
Smith
pre
says,
Book of Mormon. Yeah.
yeah. Well, this is 1832, so it's after
Oh, no,
Book of Mormon, right?
after. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, it
No,
is
you're
too.
good. Yeah, you're good. But yeah, he says, this is Smith talking about his own history, a history of the life of Joseph Smith Jr. I was born in the town of Sharon in the state of Vermont, North America, of goodly parents. So
Of
even that
course.
little phrase, right?
There it is.
Same thing you find in First Nephi and with Robinson Crusoe. I was born in the year 1632 of a good family.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, that is wonderful.
yeah. But besides that, you have before that you have the laying of heads. So you have all the different points that are going to be touched on, coming up, and then you have that little intro, and it's just a fun little connection. I mean, I definitely invite people to read Robinson Crusoe. It's a fantastic story, and it's crazy. It changes genre throughout. It goes from being kind of first person narrative to letters, and it's just a fun book. So yeah, but so he goes over that, and he talks about a couple of different sermons that Smith gave, where he's basically building up all of the evidence that, like, yeah, this is actually how Smith composed his oral compositions, was through the laying down of heads.
Yeah, and he shows on page 20.
Mhm.
This will move us forward in Joseph Smith's life chronology, but
Yeah.
The opening portion, for instance, he says of Smith's 1843 sermon on the prodigal son offers a clear and unambiguous example of laying down heads in sermon construction. And then he goes through it, and Davis demonstrates to me now. I got a little further than this, and I can't wait to finish reading this. But even through the first 50 pages, and I've only had a book a day.
Yeah.
But he does show me that, number one, Davis has mastered the material.
Mhm.
It's not like he is attempting to convince someone that you should now begin to either mistrust someone or something.
Right.
That isn't even what he's doing at
Yeah.
all. So I'm just saying this for my audience sake. Don't go into either apologist, defender, or critic, lambast, refutation mode. That's not what this book's about. This book is laying out a process of an educational situation with which Joseph Smith flows smoothly with it.
Mhm.
And it's beautiful how Davis lays this out.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
really,
you were right. This is a wonderful, wonderful book for that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and all of the reviews from other academics in the field, most of whom don't do anything with Mormon studies, have all been positive. So it's been accepted really, really well.
Nice.
But,
It should. It's a well done book. It's really not that difficult to understand. You know
yeah.
what? You know what shocks me, Colby?
Uh-huh.
All my life, I've been involved in one way or another with Mormon studies, and the material has been right in front of me my whole life, and I never saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, what I mean by that is this theme of oratory,
Yeah.
this theme of giving speeches, etc. As a missionary, I went out there and I taught the Joseph Smith story. Well, there was a heated contention of all the various churches. I didn't know which one to join. My mom took me to this meeting. My dad took me to this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
My mom joined this church. Dad wouldn't, so I kind of helped. All of this preaching, all of this talking, etc., is happening daily for years.
Yep.
I never thought of actually thinking about the extent of that kind of an influence on people.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the most amazing eye-opening parts of this book.
Yeah.
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 It's just right there.
Yeah, just like the King James language, oratory and public speaking and performance was in the air people were breathing in early America. It was very much a part of everyday life. So
everyday life,
yeah.
Literally everyday life. Yeah. And it's amazing how maybe it's because it's so ubiquitous. I couldn't see it. It took someone of William Davis to say,
mm-hmm.
Well, how would that have influenced, or how would that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
I love books that do that for you. That's why I'm very grateful that you told me about this book. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yep. No, it is really great.
And then he does go through on Smith's method, the logistics of it,
mm-hmm.
and Smith's audience. I'm on page 61.
Okay, so jumps,
audience. Yeah, I'm just jumping around. And the idea of, and I liked how he did describe. And it wasn't like it was a set formula either. It wasn't formulaic processing across the board. Some of the ministers would take short little notes on a piece of paper that they could hold in the palm of their hand and use that.
Yeah.
Others put entire lines or short paragraphs, etc. So there were differences. It just depended on the personality of the people.
Yeah. And sometimes the denomination.
The King Follett sermon structure.
Yes.
I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to getting to that point because, of course, that is his masterpiece. And by that time, 1844, he had been doing oratory now. He'd been practicing this for a long time.
Yep.
So interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you'll like that chapter a lot. It's really eye-opening, just how much the King Follett sermon is entrenched.
Yeah, I cannot wait to get to that one. Yeah, that's a whole chapter, isn't it?
Yep.
And then he's got the sermon culture in the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
The next chapter. Did you find that pretty interesting? I guess this is laying down the bullet points, the heads, and then fleshing it out. Yeah. I'll be
especially just sermon culture in general.
Book, doesn't he?
Yeah, there are so many sermons throughout the Book of Mormon in complete, versions of the sermon. So there's just tons. So that's really a fantastic chapter that dives into how at different points throughout the Book of Mormon, different characters are giving sermons, and then how they're implementing the implementing and laying down heads, and how so much of it highlights the extemporaneous public speaking methods that were present. And I should note before we jump too far too that toward the middle of chapter 2, that's when he sort of takes a little bit of a shift, and he's still talking about Smith, but he really dives into the literature of the day. So he uses, where was that at?
He uses Moore's Charity School
That
an
one, yeah.
nationally recognized institution. I'd never heard of it. That
Mhm.
was good. That was good. I'm on
Yeah.
page 30. I don't know if that's where you were going, but
Yeah,
yeah.
so this one's 23. He
Sure.
uses the book
Oh yeah.
Reflections on the Four Principal Religions from David Williamson,
And
and
he was a
I
big
wow,
author. He was
yeah,
well known.
right, yeah, and,
Yeah.
highlights how even in Williamson's, he talks about how ministers would compose these exhaustive, lists, and then like these bullet points, and all of that. And so from there, he spends quite a bit of time talking about not only public speaking, but particularly sermon culture in the relevant areas. So like sermonizing in the Connecticut River Valley, and that's the area of New England that Joseph Smith's family, was in. So yeah, he
All
spends
of
a
his
lot of time on that.
extended family. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I should say that extended family. But he's always blending in, Smith in the conversations there. But he really dives in to the actual
Yeah, this isn't
content
really
of
about
the area.
Joseph Smith, is it? This is the area and the
Mhm.
style of the preachers, Solomon
Yep.
Stoddard,
Yep.
and those kind of, oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
George Whitefield.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep. So just coming out of all of the revival, all of the revivals in the burned over district, from the 1730s and 40s all the way up until the 1830s and 40s, with the Second Great Awakening. Yeah.
yeah,
There's
this
so much
began
there.
way before Joseph Smith was a twinkle in his mama's eye.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
it just sweeps right through. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I like how he does that.
yeah. So I think that where it turns, I mean, all of that is already incredibly interesting and really, really important. So that's, all the way up until like the end of chapter 3, as he's really kind of focusing on laying the groundwork for, okay, this is actually what was going on. And he's not just sort of summarizing the work of other scholars in that area on sermon culture and public performance.
He's exploring the material
Yeah, he's
itself.
doing his own, important work. And then chapter 4, he goes through the King Follett sermon to show, like, from the beginning of his life to the end of his life, this is the way that Joseph Smith, composed. And then I love the switch, chapter 5. I think that goes pretty much to the end of the book. Let's see, really quick, just to make sure. It's about half of the book. Yeah. So he really switches, and essentially it's like, okay, we've done all of this work sort of laying the ground for understanding the use of laying down heads in oral compositions in early America, and particularly in the area that Joseph Smith lived and grew up in. Now
Right.
let's actually focus on how this applies to the Book of Mormon and how we would understand this as a performance text, and goes through so much of the material. So yeah, at first, like,
You only get to that on page 89, and it looks like he really goes, up into, oh my goodness.
all the way to the end.
You're all the way to the end. All
Yeah.
the way up to 196. Oh,
Yep.
yeah, half the book.
Yep.
Oh, I'm looking forward to getting to that point. So
Yeah.
you really thought this was enlightening too, huh?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, because not only do you get this, the sermon culture in the Book of Mormon, which anyone reading the book, if they just kind of sit and think of it, it's like, oh yeah, there are a lot of sermons in there, and complete sermons.
They really are too.
Right? And they just kind of pop up. It's kind of a digression almost sometimes. Other times not so much, but sometimes. So you have that. He goes through and he shows how you may or may not be aware. Like at the beginning of the Book of Mormon, it's more obvious because that material that happens before First Nephi 1, it's a part of the text of the Book of Mormon. It's just a floater almost, right? It's there. Everyone reads it, but it doesn't have a verse or chapter. But it's a part of the text of the Book of Mormon. But is it? It's this kind of thing. So it stands out. So that one is like really clear to see once it's what it's doing, that it lays down heads for the a good chunk of First Nephi. You kind of see what its purpose is. But there are other places in the book that it's not as clear that that's what's going on. And so he actually talks about how there are explicit and concealed heads in the book. And that's not like to just kind of clarify for your audience. he doesn't mean that they're concealed, like this is like sneaky or anything like that. It's just that sometimes there are heads that aren't going to be sort of set off from the text, that aren't going to be as explicitly, doing that. And so he talks about some of those and ways to sort of see them, but then also how they, actually function, like in Jacob's sermons. You have some on, Alma the Younger, and then he talks again about Smith's background in training. That's a really important section, if this is the section I'm thinking that it is, because Smith was actually part of, he was an exhorter in a Methodist Sunday school. And being an exhorter is really important. You weren't just, a member of the Sunday school. You were actually someone who was there, trusted by the minister. And after the minister would give a sermon, the group was there reading and studying and, working through, trying to convert to Methodism and to join. And the exhorter would come around and sort of second what the minister had said. Sort of, try to exhort the person to do that. So he actually
was one of those.
Yeah. So he actually did have, direct like experience with, sermon culture in that way. So yeah, you get some of that in here. It's really just fantastic. I love.
See, this is cool. You mind if I read this real quick?
Yeah,
on page 106?
Yeah.
Just to reaffirm what you're saying, in a serious and affectionate address to the junior preachers in the Methodist Connection, 1798, John Pawson identified 3 core ideas as the great and important truths for Methodist preachers. Number 1, man is a fallen, guilty, depraved, and helpless creature. Number 2, Jesus Christ has fully accomplished the work of man's redemption. Number 3, the absolute necessity of repentance, of faith in Christ, the knowledge of salvation by the remission of sins, of the new birth, in other words, baptism, and the entire sanctification of body, soul, and spirit. I mean, there you go. That's in 1798. And isn't this how Joseph Smith expounded in not only just this Book of Mormon, though, now?
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of some parts of the D&C too.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, he goes through on some of those. This is just a few pages before, like in Jacob 2, he goes through and actually notes, like there's an outline, anchor, pride. And now, my brethren, I have spoken unto you concerning pride. A tangent that's a rebuke, exhortation. And those of you which have afflicted your neighbor and persecuted him, keep his commandments and glorify him forever. And then a resumptive repetition. And now I make an end of speaking unto you concerning this pride. So it goes back to that first one. And then a topic transition. Right. So it's fantastic. He actually goes through and sort of, shows you how some of these structure and how it works, how it comes together.
And it's not like Joseph Smith would have had to spend multitudinous weeks of arduous hours per day to put this system together.
It's kind of like
just a simple logic flow once you get it.
Well, and it's kind of like, some of the best guitar players had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix didn't know how to read sheet music. He didn't know how to tune. Some fantastic live stuff from that. Him trying to ask some of his friends to come tune, and they're like, "Nah." It's kind of like that, where this is more like you learn through experience, right? It wasn't something necessarily like in class as he was younger. They taught a structure, right? So it would have been in his mind. He would have been very highly aware of it in that way. Yeah. But going out and actually experiencing it and doing it, it comes naturally, and you sort of just adopt, and it becomes a part of how you do that work. So whether or not Smith was like super conscious of the lessons that he had on public speaking from when he was at the common school or what, it doesn't. Yeah, it's there wasn't a huge systematic thing for him. I think it was useful, and it helped him to, just like it did lots and lots and lots of other. Most other early Americans to be able to do that. That's
what he's showing in this book.
Yeah,
it didn't start in 1805, you guys. And it certainly didn't end in 1844 either.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yep.
fascinating.
Yeah. So then big shift gets so important, and into chapter 6, constructing Book of Mormon historical narratives. So you start to get an idea of how the laying down heads becomes really crucial for the larger narratives in the Book of Mormon. You have all of that. Davis is really good throughout the book to be conscious of all of the different audience members that he might have that are reading it. He is, again, writing primarily to academics who are studying, sermon culture, oratory, all that kind of stuff we've been talking about in early America. But he knows that, there will be Mormon readers, that there will be people who disagree with, some of what he is saying in the book. And he does a really good job at sort of attempting to mitigate some of that conflict in the book itself, and offer potentially different some views that still engage the evidence that he is showing. But as far as history goes, here's the evidence that I'm finding. As far as like whatever you believe about it, here are a couple of different options, right? He actually kind of bent over backward in doing that. And to be honest, a lot of us academics that have read the book, in those passages are kind of like, you didn't have to do that, but knowing, who some of your reading audience would be, he did it. So he.
No, that's a wonderful service. He is actually touching all aspects of his audience with all of the different kinds of oratorical. Yeah. No, I am looking very forward to finishing this book.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. But it all kind of leads up to then the final chapter on a theory of translation with Smith.
It does, yeah.
So I think that you'll like that.
You think I'll like that one? Yeah. Now, I have read Brant Gardner's it's the Red Book on the translation of the Book of Mormon. So I will be real curious to see how this works in relation to that.
Yeah.
And I've read several of one of my good friends in the chats on my live, Tim Rathbone. I've actually had him on the show. He was in the historical archives in the 1970s with Arturo de Hoyos, some of those guys, and he actually did the research for one of the big farms papers on the translation of the Book of Mormon with Jack Welch. So I'll reread that, and then after I get done with this, then I'll reread that, and it'll be real fun to compare. I love it when various different authors come up with the same subject, but they all have a different take on it. That's always fun.
No, definitely.
All right. So he actually ends it on as a theory of well, technically the epilogue, but yeah. Oh, yeah.
He has a short epilogue. Yeah.
And it is a short epilogue.
Yeah.
That is fun stuff. Yeah. Well, see, this is why I love doing these shows, is finding excellent people who've done their homework and research and getting PhDs, or else they already have their PhDs. So because, and for my audience sake, get this book. I'm only a third of the way through, and I am really finding my enjoyment increasing. And now that I've had Colby review it for the video sake and for my sake, I am really looking forward to finishing this book. And so yet some more information that we have to pass on that's valuable to the audience. So we are at our time limit for these short videos. We're at 45 minutes. So Colby and I are going to say hasta la vista, baby. But like Johann Sebastian said, I'll be back. And you guys thought it was Schwarzenegger, didn't you? All right, we're going to head out, you guys. We will catch you on the next Backyard Professor recording and video whenever we gather out there. We are trying to produce as much as possible for your benefits and ours, and we are having a blast. This is so much fun, it's almost illegal.